Welcome back to another reading and correcting of Stepping Up by me, Kindar, the Tiger, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. Today we are doing chapter 97. Tibs. Alistair greeted him stiffly as Tibs entered the training room. I'm glad to see you came. Tibs let out the breath he'd been holding. I'm sorry for how I said what I said at the bazaar. But not for what you said, the teacher said cold. You know what, that's not a question. But not for what you said, his teacher said coldly. Have you? Tibs closed his mouth and on the anger and took more breath. Have you talked with the townsfolk, or are we too straight for you? I haven't, but not for the reasons you imagine. He stepped forward. He stepped around Tibs, making him feel like he was on display. I'm an adventurer. There's nothing I can do to hide that. He looked at Tibs up and down, and Tibs did his best not to see judgment in those vivid blue eyes. When an adventurer shows up in a town or a city, it's because something bad has happened or will happen. We are not people the common folk want to speak with. Rock isn't just another town, Tibs replied. We live among them. They know we aren't any different than they are. But you are. Alistair stepped before Tibs and put his arm behind his back. You, Tibs, wield essence. Magic. Something the common folk can only dream of doing because they can't imagine putting themselves through the hardship or to unlock the possibility. You're right that Rock differs from most places, but again, it isn't for the reason you imagine. It has nothing to do with runners living among the people, but with how young the dungeon is. How, not too long ago, you were one of them, without essence, without power. Many here remember you as the Omega you were, as a child filled with fear, unsure of his future. Even now, many who come to brave the dungeon are a little different from the people living here. But in a few years, after the dungeon has graduated a few times, the Omegas will be lost among all the others who come here to strengthen themselves. The people here will no longer see those similar to them, but powerful adventurers here to become more powerful. They might even see Gammas or Betas should the dungeon become strong enough. Then it will not be adventurers they see, but forces of nature. Not all dungeons graduate to the point where all levels of adventure can train there? No, but you will not sidetrack me this time. This isn't about dungeons, but about the reality you are still too young to fully understand. A Zeta adventurer can level a house with a thought. It doesn't matter the level, the element they wield. Even a purity fighter can cause it to happen. Bards tell story of how we travel the world and stop monster. They leave out the destruction caused in the process. Or if they leave it in, they do so in a way that the monsters shoulder all the blame. After all, if they weren't out there, the destruction would not have happened. He collected himself. Monsters are rare, and everyone is grateful for it. I am grateful for it. For if I have to go after a monster, no matter how careful I am in taking it down, there will be little left of the area the fight takes place in. The monster will not be the one causing all that destruction. And keep in mind that I will take care to cause as little of it as I can manage. Not every adventurer is as careful about the power they yield as I am. You are, really. Our position within society leads to many to be, as you would refer to them, nobles. There was no anger or disdain in his teacher's voice, but sadness. You say the people here are different, but they have heard the same stories sung in every city and every kingdom. They have heard the darker stories told by traveling merchants. Few will be true, but when one tells of a village or town no longer there as they pulled in to sell their wares, it's dialogue. It will leave an impression regardless. Alistair sighed. We are both saviors and destroyers. We cannot escape one role without abandoning the other, and people forced to flee the place they were born too quickly too, too quickly forget the danger that led to that happening, but remember the people who forced them to leave. So, some stories whispered between people are true, and in those stories, who is the monster is rarely as clear as in the bard's song. Is it really that bad? Tibs asked in dismay. He could envision an adventurer bringing down a house. He'd done it with Sebastian's. But a town? A city? Even a group of them couldn't do such a thing, could they? You'll find out for yourself in time, Tibs, Alistair sighed. There is a reason most adventurers remain within the guild once they have repaid what they owe. There are few other places where they are welcome with open arms, and not drawn swords. He raised a hand and Tibs opened his mouth. You've delayed your training long enough. Let's start with what you did at the bazaar when I went to grab you. I've been practicing suffocating my body while doing other things, like fighting in the dungeon. That was true enough. It's become easier to not be distracted. Again, that was true. And it's causing most attacks to miss me, which was only true when he was suffused with water, which he no longer spent all his time in the dungeon doing. When you grabbed me, I thought you were, well, I just reacted. Alistair's smile was small. You simply reacted. I suppose the dungeon is honing your survival instinct quickly. Tell me, because I don't believe I asked this. How did you first cause your body to be suffused with essence? Tibs frowned and tried to figure out how to answer him. He could sense what it was like for Alistair when his essence filled his channel of life. When his essence filled the channel of life essence with water. But that didn't tell him how his teacher did it. He hadn't asked his friends because he hadn't considered the question might come up. All he had to go with was what had happened. I pushed more essence in my reserve than it can contain. I still remember the pain of pulling in Bardic's essence into himself, of forcing it into what he thought of as his unending reverse, and having to pull in more when it was full, the walls cracking and spilling out through his body. Really? Alistair asked, surprised. Couldn't think of another way, he said, hoping his reasoning made sense. When I overfill a tankard, it spills over. I thought that if I could get it to do the same in my reserve, the spill would go in my body. He bit his lower lip. Isn't that how it's done? Alistair laughed. Tibs, you should have realized by now there is no fixed way something is done. The brute force approach is more a fighter's way of doing it than a rogue's. But what matters is that you survived what you did. Tibs stared at his teacher. Others died learning to suffuse their body with essence. It felt like he was dying even before the corruption was trying to do the same, but he thought it was a circumstance, not the process. That was all that pain. Did you have to overfill it the second time? Yes, Tibs said. That was more believable. But it became easier the more I did it. How did you first do it? Alistair smiled. What is essence, Tibs? He nearly growled. How often had Alistair asked him that? How often had he been right to ask? Tibs thought about it and gave the same answer as the previous times. It is, and it isn't the element. His teacher nodded. If it isn't, how can the walls of your reserve contain it? Tibs opened his mouth and closed it, and he realized he had no answer. How did his reserve contain something that was and wasn't? You forced your will on it, Alistair said. I realized that my reserve was my will, and what I willed to be contained could be willed to be released in part or in whole. Tibs frowned. That felt not right. Or maybe Tib's situation was different. He couldn't affect his small reserves other than channeling the essence. And as soon as he started on that, his core reserve became that essence. He wrote this down. Yes, Alistair said in an understanding tone. Essence never stops being confusing. Alistair placed a hand on his shoulder. Tibs, now, this is it, isn't it? He asked, unable to keep the despair from his voice. What do you expect is about to happen? Alistair asked cautiously. Jekyll told me that when he was able to fuse his body with essence, they made him graduate to Lamada. That is the clearest way to know you are ready for the next stage. There can only be two runners at Lambda on a team. There can't be two runners at Lambda on a team. The rule is that only one can be a higher level than the dungeon. I was under the impression there had been changes implemented to the dungeons being more aggressive than expected. The rules went back when he graduated, or at least it's expected. With how he and the guild viewed each other, he wasn't asking Taranya if she was willing to leave them be. Not graduating will hold you back. There are resources I could call on that will help in the coming training. Sure. I haven't had a family in a long time. It's there. I don't want to lose them. The reason was true, if not the entirety of his feeling. His official level within the guild might be a row, but with all the elements he could channel, what difference did it make if he could advance with water? If he couldn't advance with water for a while, would let him look for ways to train his other elements, wouldn't it? I know you're going to tell me that the guilds aren't carrying out. I know you're going to tell me that even if I'm on a different team, Jackal, Kirinames, and Kamdar will still be my family, or that it doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to lose them one day, so I should get used to that now. But I have them now. I'm going to do what I have to stay. I have to. Wow. But I have them now, and I'm going to do what I have to stay with them now. To stay with them now. Alistair nodded. I know you think the guild is uncaring in how it does things, but you'll find that how it acts have come about as reaction to how the dungeons behave. He became thoughtful. But I don't see any harm in keeping your level from the guild. I've already had to be unorthodox about how I trained you, so I can use that to justify some requests. And for those I can't, well, I think that forcing myself to train you outside the usual methods will be good for me. You've shown me that I've grown complacent in how things can be done. Tibs took a sigh. At least that resolved one potential problem. Now he simply had to hope Alistair wouldn't take over all the time Tibs wasn't busy keeping the town safe, because he needed some of that for the training he had to do on his own. And that concludes chapter 97 of Stepping Up. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next one is going to be, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story, it is available for free on Royal Road. If you want to support me and read further ahead than Royal Road, we are about 9 chapters ahead on my Patreon. That's where you go. If you want to listen to me do these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. The links are in the notes. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.